Hello and welcome back. About a month ago now, I finished my first draft, and I know I've been very vague and mysterious on my channel about this story thus far, so today I wanted to sit down and share the inspiration for this story. And the reason I'm doing this now is that I wanted to wait until I was all the way done with that first draft so I could see the big broad strokes of this story before sharing anything. I am working towards developmental edits. I am taking a little bit of a break, but also making a plan for how I want to tackle that revision. But there are still details that I can share. And this was inspired by a little trend that was going around Instagram stories about a month and a half, maybe 2 months at this point ago. I shared some facts in that, and I felt really excited sharing those facts, and I realized they're still pretty vague, so I'd like to expand upon those. That's my handle, so you don't miss out on little nuggets like that. So there were 5 facts that I shared in that post, and the first thing I want to start with is the song that really ties the whole story in and that I listened to a lot while writing the first draft, and that is Lights Are On by Tom Rosenthal. While there is a whole playlist on Spotify that you can go listen to, and I plug it down below in my videos, this song has multiple versions of it on that playlist. There's like an instrumental, there's like an a cappella version. Like, it seems a little obsessive, strange to have so many different versions of it on there, but I almost think of it as like the theme of the story, the main theme, and how in movies we reference back those themes. Like in Star Wars, we have characters with very famous themes, like the Princess Leia theme, and it comes back over and over again, and we tie it to them. This song just does that for me, and it might be the main male MC's theme song, character song, if we want to go that far. I guess I will spoil this. This wasn't one of my facts, but it is a dual POV. There's the male MC and the female MC, and I guess this song would be more his. It does apply to both of them, but I would say it's more closely tied to him. And if you're not familiar with Tom Rosenthal, please go check him out. He pulls at my heartstrings. He's a singer-songwriter and composer, and his music is beautiful and authentic, I guess is a good word for it. I think he falls under like folk music. I think I like folk music more than I actually give credit to. Like whenever people are like, oh, what kind of music do you listen to? What are your favorite artists? I'm always like, I don't know how to answer that. And folk is definitely a part of that rotation that I should just say. But the reason why this is like the main song of the story has to do with, one, the beautiful composition of it. It's very emotional. And 2, the lyrics, just spot on. So I'll read you some of them. The opening lyrics of this song are, God stood me up and I don't know why. Lights are on, but nobody's home. And then the bridge, I think, there ain't no love like our love. That captures the 2 main themes of the story, which is this older romance between this elderly couple. So the 2 MCs, this is another reveal that I have mentioned before in passing. The 2 MCs are an elderly couple, and it focuses on their love story, their mature love story, and their old age and death, because that's the next big thing that's looming when you're old and you've lived your happily ever after with your person. Like, that's the big fear, the big separator. And both of these characters go through a spiritual, religious exploration. And I don't really want to say more than that because I feel like you can figure it out. So we're going to move on to the next fact, I suppose, about this story. So, like I said, this story does deal with death and religion and spirituality, but I have been calling it a fantasy, and it is a fantasy. It is a very particular subgenre of fantasy called Bangsian fantasy. And if you've never heard of Bangsian fantasy, I honestly didn't know what it was until I was doing more research for this story. It's basically an afterlife fantasy. I don't know, for the longest time I was just calling this a romantasy, because it is a romantic fantasy, but there has been a lot of debate recently on what romantasy is and whether or not it has to have spice and things like that. I will say this romantic fantasy subgenre does not have spice in it. Some popular Bangsian fantasy that you might not have realized are Bangsian fantasy are stories like Dante's Inferno. That's a classic that kind of helped define the genre. What Dreams May Come, which is a novel, but also a movie with Robin Williams, and even more recently, Over the Garden Wall, which is also based on Dante's Inferno. And there are others. There are lots of others, but just to give you an idea, it's just a story that explores the afterlife. And I think we've seen this in a lot of mythology too. Like if you were a Greek mythology, Percy Jackson kind of person, the story of Hades and Persephone, or even Tales with Hercules, going into the underworld where Hades lived. And I think that's why I have an interest in this subgenre that is definitely not mainstream, not super commercial, but does have a chance to be very popular with what we've seen in the past. I did have a really hard time defining the genre of this book. At first I thought this was just gonna be like magical realism, and then I realized no, we are actually going into a different world. And I am always going to classify this story that I am writing as fantasy because we don't actually know what happens in the afterlife. It's just a speculative piece. We're gonna move on to the next little fact. This story is informed and inspired by an old man that I am friends with. The character isn't really based on him, but I will say when I moved back, I started interacting with a lot more elderly people than I had when I was living in big cities. But I would say the story is informed by them and this particular friend just because I'd never really thought too much about being elderly until I started interacting with them more. And of course, obviously, I am not in my 70s, I'm not in my 80s, I haven't lived through that yet. So I just take the little bits and pieces of daily life about like body aches and things they can't do anymore and struggles like that to inform this story and to try and put myself in that mindset. But the other big thing that inspired this story was imagining what life would be like for my fiance and I in our old age. And you can say, oh, or you can say, oh, that's super cheesy. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. So that's kind of like fact 3 and 4. Being around these older people, seeing what life is like, seeing what makes them tick, seeing the difference between people in like their 80s who are still very active, very coherent, versus older people who are sitting in the nursing home and not as active and not as talkative, and just thinking about my fiance and I are going to be that one day. What's our life going to be like? What are we going to be like at that time, based on what I know about these people? And then what happens when you lose someone that you spent all this time with, that you care for deeply, kind of a thing. That's kind of the big basis of this story. And I will say there are pieces of myself and my fiance in these characters, but they aren't us. They aren't based on us. And finally, fact 5, but this story is an exploration of religion, world religion, and spirituality, and that is embedded in the text. There is an exploration of soulmates, of Christianity, of a few other religions, particularly Buddhism, and the possibility of reincarnation, and just the question of what does the afterlife look like, especially for these characters who are atheists. So these characters do not believe in God. So what does death look like? And I'm trying to write this in a way where it doesn't favor or villainize religion, but I thought making these characters atheists would be the best way to explore multiple religions and see their character growth, their struggles, like an internal conflict. I think sensitivity readers will be needed for a story like this. I just want to take more of an anthropological approach to this. I did take a lot of anthropology classes when I was in undergrad, but I also think one of the big struggles is that I can't focus on every single religion. And I think those ones that I highlight will have to be based on what makes sense for the characters and their personalities and what's going to challenge them most. This is the story that I am writing. those are some pretty big details about it. It might not be everyone's cup of tea. I think we'll leave that there. I haven't written the blurb yet. I'm debating whether I want to do that with you guys or keep that secret. I haven't given you guys like the big driving plot force. There's still one missing piece to this story. I mean, there's lots of things to this story that I haven't said or revealed, but there's one very large piece to this story that I haven't said anything about that I think I want to keep under wraps, at least for a little bit longer. Maybe until beta readers, maybe until querying, we'll see. And until next time, cheers!